And we kick off this evening with a look at the cinema.
I'm not a complicated man. I like cinema.
It's beautiful, beautiful cinema.
Cinema history come to life.
I found my solace in the small cinema I went to every Thursday night.
I'm a professor of cinema.
I go to the cinema for the stories.
There was no competition between the cinema and seminar.
I mean, it's not within the realm of conventional cinema.
And now,
here's Payson Johnson
with a cinema review.
It is Monday, October 7th, 2024, 8 EST, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Cinemaster's Reviews. Got two movies we are reviewing this week. Joker, Follie, Deux, the sequel to Joker, as well as the Outrun, the new movie starring Saoirse Ronan. I say we jump right in, talking about the biggest movie that opened this week, Joker, Follie, Deux, directed by Todd Phillips. This is a sequel to the 2019 film Joker. It starred Joaquin Phoenix as the character of Arthur Fleck, who would go on to become the Joker at the end of that film after he goes on a killing spree, killing a talk show host, played by Robert De Niro on screen. This movie picks up a few years after that movie came, after the events of that movie take place. Arthur is currently still at Arkham State Hospital. He is awaiting to go on trial. He meets another patient by the name of Lee Quinzel, played by Lady Gaga, and they sort of gain an attraction because they have similar mental issues. They have similar common interests. That's the reason why the film was called Follie Deux. I actually looked it up. What Follie Deux is, it's where two people with similar mental illnesses come together and fall in love because of those illnesses. And the movie just sort of goes on from there. Arthur goes to court. The movie is a musical for some reason. First one wasn't a musical. This one just many musical numbers in it. And yeah, that's essentially the whole shebang. I think you can very clearly tell that Todd Phillips and Joaquin Phoenix, but specifically Todd Phillips, was not expecting that first Joker movie to be as big of a success as it was. Obviously, people love Batman. Obviously, people love the world of Gotham City. But I still don't think he was expecting it to be a $1 billion movie, become the highest grossing R-rated film at the time. And when he came back to direct this movie, everyone was sort of like, does Joker really need a sequel? It ends with him in prison, with him just sort of like running amok and clearly still being insane and clearly not being okay. And going into this movie, I think you can very clearly tell that Todd Phillips hated the fact that he had to come back and make a sequel to that movie, that whether or not he liked enjoying it, definitely doesn't feel like people took the right messages from that movie. Now, I just want to get out in front of this. There are going to be some people, I'm seeing some people talk about whether this movie is a healthy portrayal of mental health, whether it's a irresponsible portrayal of mental health. I'll be honest, I don't really consider myself like a movie expert per se. I know a lot about movies. I like to talk to you guys about movies. I'm definitely not a mental health expert. I am not going to be commenting on the portrayal of mental health illness in this movie. I think it's very clearly a work of fiction. It's set in a comic book world, even though it is supposed to be in a very like realistic setting. So if you are looking for whether or not this movie is a accurate portrayal of people with mental health issues, I recommend you go find different sources, because I'm not going to be commenting on that. I will be commenting on the quality of the film, and I'll be honest, I don't think it is very high. It feels like a completely different movie than the first one. Like, this does not feel like a sequel to Joker, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. There are many great sequels that have completely different genres and tones than the first one. Evil Dead 2 took the horror aspects of Evil Dead and turned it into more of a horror comedy. Aliens took the horror aspects of Alien, turned it into an action movie. Joker was a very grim, dark character study on this person that is clearly going insane. Clearly, the world is like cast aside, and this movie, while it still has some of those elements, is very much more of an over-the-top, bombastic, showman type movie. And I guess if I'm looking at it as on its own, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. If I'm looking at it as a sequel, I am saying like it is just so crazy that it is just such a far departure from what that first movie was that you can't help but being just a little bit distracted. Joaquin Phoenix won an Oscar for that first movie. I think he's a phenomenal actor. I think he was very good in that first movie, regardless of what you thought about Joker. I think you cannot deny that he is giving a very good performance. I don't think he's bad in this movie. I think he still has great moments, but he's so much more over the top, which part of me does think, as I'm reflecting on it more, I think is to be expected because throughout the majority of that first Joker movie, Arthur Fleck is someone that's like on the verge of going insane and on the verge of cracking under the pressure of society. And this movie opens with him being in a mental hospital. He's medicated at the first half of this movie, so he's a little bit like restrained, a little bit under the weather. When he meets Lee, he stops taking his medication again, so he just becomes even more over the top. That character that we saw at the end of the first Joker, wearing the clown makeup, wearing the big suit, dancing around, and you get a lot more of that. And watching this movie, I think it really made me recognize how I think the reason why the portrayal in the first movie worked was because it was just in these little short bursts, and having an entire movie centered around this like insane and comical character can get a little bit grating at points. And the other thing it made me realize was I think even in terms of Jokers, this character just seems just a little bit more restrained. Like as I'm watching this huge jukebox musical where this character is in court defending himself at points in the clown makeup, I'm just thinking like, if this was like Nicholson's Joker or Ledger's Joker that was doing this, I would just be so much more captivated. But because I'm watching Phoenix's Joker, which I do think is a good portrayal, part of me is just like the movie just kind of feels like on ambient at some point, and I'm just like, why am I watching a courthouse movie where the character on trial is the Joker? And I just felt it was just a little bit silly and just a little bit undercooked. It didn't know which direction it wanted to go, whether or not it wanted to be too more over the top, or whether or not it wanted to be more serious. And I think that was just kind of a fault of the film. Lady Gaga feels weirdly restrained in this movie. Like when she was cast as Lee Quinzel, who, although they don't necessarily call her Harley Quinn, it's very clear that she is supposed to be this film's version of Harley Quinn. She's a love interest of the Joker. She eventually teams up with him. When she was first announced, I was like, man, she is going to be just balls to the wall insane in this movie. It was going to be a really great showcase of her talents. And throughout the majority of the movie, I think she's actually not that great. She tends to just say all of her lines in a very like mumbled fashion, in a very like low key way of like, "Oh hi Arthur, I love you. Don't let them put you down. I'm the one who truly gets you. I'm the one who truly understands." And just like you just end up becoming annoyed by her like pitter patter performance style that she's doing. It just doesn't come off very, very interesting, which is so weird because this is a musical with Lady Gaga in the center about Batman characters. The last thing I thought I was going to say was that Lady Gaga was restrained and underacting, but here we are, and that's kind of what we get in this movie. This does kind of sound like I just absolutely hate the movie, and I don't, because what really sucks is the movie had me going for a little while. I think the first like 20, 30 minutes where we're in Arkham State Hospital, when we're seeing how the prisoners and how the prison guards react to Arthur Fleck being there, probably my favorite performance in the movie. The head security guard is played by Brendan Gleeson, and he is just an absolute just asshole in this movie, and I think he perfectly shows how the system treats Arthur, where like they view him as this guy that was just there to like tell bad jokes, but they also have no respect for him. Like they're constantly like pushing him around the prison. They're constantly like shoving him against walls. And I think the movie does a really great job of showing just how poor, especially back then in the 80s, our treatment of mental illness was. Again, I don't really want to get too much into that. And I think Brendan Gleeson he's always fun to see in these types of roles, and I think he plays it really, really well. But once we enter the courtroom, once we have Arthur's lawyer is played by Catherine Keener. She's the one that plays the most level-headed look on the world in this movie, and she's the one that's trying to get Arthur out, even though she sees just how much of just a lost cause Arthur Fleck is. Once we get into the courtroom, I think it just becomes more and more disjointed. Almost all the musical elements are in Arthur Fleck's head. It kind of reminds me of how the musical numbers of Chicago are presented. If you've never seen Chicago, Rob Marshall presents it where whenever the characters start singing, the characters enter sort of like this black room and there's like a spotlight on them. That's sort of how the musical numbers are done in this movie. I don't think the musical numbers are really all that great. I saw the movie around 3 days ago, and I hesitate to remember like really any of them except for maybe the first one and one in the middle when Arthur starts defending himself. The one in the middle where we finally have like Arthur in like this this jazz club with Lee on the piano, like that was probably the most fun I thought this movie was having, and I think that was when the movie I think knew the most about what it was trying to be, and that was just like this big silly like jazzy musical, and I thought that was fun. That's really the only moments in the movie, and when the rest of the movie is just so like dour and so dark with all these silly aspects coming in, it just feels really, really lopsided. Certain retcons are made about the Gotham universe. I thought the first movie was set in Gotham City, but the movie makes a very important note at the beginning where no, it's actually set in New York City, because when Arthur first goes to court, they say the people of New York versus they say the state of New York versus Arthur Fleck. So it's just like, oh, Gotham City's in New York. This is kind of weird, especially because the movie's set in the 80s, but we never see the Twin Towers, which is kind of weird that this movie is all going into this alternate history where 9/11 isn't going to happen. I don't get it. Clearly, Todd Phillips wasn't thinking too much about that, or maybe he was and he just completely missed the mark with that. It's just not great. The ending of this film, this movie's around 2 hours and 20 minutes, did not need to be that long. I think you probably could have done this same story in a 2-hour run mark. You know exactly where this movie is going probably an hour into the film. I'm not going to spoil what happens, but if you are engaged to what the movie is showing you, you know how it's going to end. And I think the ending still just kind of comes out of nowhere and leaves you so dissatisfied, which I understand because Todd Phillips has commented he wanted people to watch Joker feeling dissatisfied. But when he does it in this way, he does it in such a more like over-the-top way. As someone that just wants to watch a quality film, I'm just watching this and I'm like, that's where you take us. That's where this whole journey was going on. And you just end up becoming really, really disappointed. I do think it is kind of fascinating that we do have this huge blockbuster made by this guy that hates the fact that he has to make this huge blockbuster, specifically the sequel to this movie that was super successful, but very clearly attracted the wrong types of people. Obviously, there are many people, including myself, that enjoy that first Joker movies for I think the reason Todd Phillips wanted us to enjoy it. But there are obviously some people that were like, "Oh man, this movie gets me. This movie is showing that people like the Joker are right in how in how we're just broken by society," which I think is kind of like a really disturbing way to look at it. Like I think the movie clearly knows that Arthur Fleck is a villain and he's someone that is evil in this way of how he goes about just killing like many, many people in the movie. But now that we have Todd Phillips making this movie trying to show, no, guys, you guys didn't get it. This was what I was trying to say. It just feels more disjointed and just feels less subtle. And you just end up saying, what was the point of this movie when I felt like I kind of got what he was going with that first movie. And I just didn't end up feeling that entertained by the end of it. If I were to rate this movie on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, 0 being awful, 10 being amazing, I'm going pretty low. I'm going to go a 4 out of 10. I think this is a pretty bad movie. Some aspects still work. Phoenix is still pretty good. The score by Hildur Guadagnino, who won an Oscar the last time. The musical score is still excellent from this movie. I do want to give it credit there. Movie still looks good, but man, Gaga just very one note in this film. The character of Lee Quinzel goes nowhere. Like, without spoiling anything, the arc she goes on, the movie just kind of forgets about her in the third act. She shows up, and then she just goes away again. And I think Todd Phillips forgot that he had to wrap up this arc because nothing really seems that conclusive with that character. Maybe that was the point, but I just personally didn't really like it. Again, this feels like a movie that hates that it has to exist, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. but it doesn't give you any interesting reasons to care about what it's saying. If you like the first movie, I wouldn't even recommend you go see this movie because it clearly is trying as hard as it can to be as different from that first movie as you can. I just think this is one you probably can skip with all the movies coming out. Maybe check it out when it comes out on streaming because it is an interesting movie, I guess. But yeah, this isn't a very good movie. But I say we jump right into the second review of the night, that being the Outrun, directed by Nora Finchite. I really hope I pronounced that right. This is about a young woman by the name of Rona. She's in her 20s. She is a recent biology student that just graduated. She's living in Scotland, and she just recently got out of rehab, and she's going to go and live with her parents, spend time with her parents, who work on this bird farm. And she's trying to stay out of rehab, essentially not relapse. And while this movie is being told, it's told in a nonlinear fashion where you see her life when she was in college, when she met her boyfriend, when she was partying, when she was diving into alcoholism. Really interesting movie, deals with a lot of heavy themes. The number one thing I do want to say about this movie is there are some movies that I don't feel like need to be non-linear. Non-linear storytelling can oftentimes be used very, very well. You think of movies like Pulp Fiction, you think of movies like Memento, you think about these movies that really make it part of the story. And there are often some times when I do feel like it is just kind of a gimmick. And this one, it did kind of feel like a gimmick with just constantly jumping back and forth between Rona on the farm and Rona in college. Part of me does wonder if the movie would have been better if we were watching the movie where it was just told in one linear fashion, seeing this character live her life and deal with these constant struggles. Looks like I got a comment. Wow, 4 out of 10 seems right on with other reactions that I've seen, but it makes me sad with such a talented cast. Yeah, Nick and Bo, it does suck when you do watch a movie like Joker Follie Do, which has many talented people behind it, just sort of turns something in that just isn't that great. But yeah, back to the Outrun. Yeah, I do think because for me watching this movie, I was a little bit confused with the non-linear storytelling. I was often just trying to keep track of like where we were in the story and where we were in the character of Rona's life. And that did kind of leave me as an audience member a little bit confused about where the story was. That sounds like that would lead to an unsuccessful movie, but thankfully this movie is successful, and that is due in large part to Saoirse Ronan being absolutely incredible as the character of Rona. Saoirse Ronan is one of my favorite young actresses working. I think the first time I saw her was in 2015's Brooklyn, but she's been working much longer than that. I think the earliest I can think of her in was in Atonement, which came out in 2007, which she got an Oscar nomination at the age of 14, which is incredible. Lady Bird is my favorite movie of the 2010s. She's incredible in that movie, and she is absolutely incredible here. She does a great job, just like Saoirse Ronan really does well in the quiet moments where the camera is literally just on her, and you're seeing just like the pain and the emotion that this character is going through without her saying a word. Just her body language and the way how she carries herself and the way she's able to express sadness, I think, is just so exceptional. And there's a reason why I think she's one of the best actresses working today. I think she's going to have an Oscar in the next 5 to 10 years. She's probably going to get nominated for this movie, and deservingly so. I think the way how she shows the scenes where she's just out partying, trying not to have a care in the world, the scenes where she's like really struggling with alcoholism, getting into arguments with her boyfriend, which, by the way, the scenes with her boyfriend, I wrote his name down. Her boyfriend, Danon, played by Papa Essidou. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Those were my favorite scenes in the movie. Like, there are a lot of scenes she has with her parents, with both her mom and dad, who have separated, but the scenes she has with her boyfriend, I think, are easily my favorite. There's one late in the movie when she comes out of rehab where she reconnects with him after they've broken up, and I think that's a really, really touching scene. And yeah, Saoirse Ronan is just an absolute acting powerhouse that you just don't see of nowadays. Kind of different in a way of like someone like Emma Stone is. Like, Emma Stone is really great at taking like these really showy roles. Saoirse Ronan is someone that takes kind of like these quieter roles but does so much with them, and I think that's why I really did end up enjoying the Outrun. Also, the cinematography of the Orkney Islands, which is where this movie takes place, which is like this island coast on the coast of Scotland, absolutely gorgeous, like absolutely beautiful. Just the UK in general, like specifically like Ireland and Scotland, like whenever they're shown on film, I think are always really, really well done in this movie. The way how Nora Fingerscheid directs this, she adds a lot of just a lot of atmosphere to this movie that I think really, really helps it. I will say probably a little too long, just like Joker Follie do. I'm reviewing 2 movies this week that I think they're just a little bit too long. The movie comes in like just around the 2-hour mark. Probably could have been like an hour 45, hour 40. And I think you probably would have got the got where this movie was going, where you're watching this character trying to grow, trying to restart their life again after they've gone through such a traumatic event. And I do think you probably could have shaved off a little, because by the end I was sort of thinking the movie was repeating certain things, the movie was reusing certain scenes, and I was wondering when we were going to get to the end part. But for the most part, I did enjoy this movie. If I were to review this movie on a scale of 0 to 10, if I were to rate this movie on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. Again, there are just a few things that I think keep it from greatness. I think it could have hit that level, but when you have a performance as good as Saoirse Ronan, when the movie looks as good as it is, I can't help but recommend it. Probably not one you need to rush out to the theater to see, but when this movie does come out streaming, I would recommend watching it. It's probably going to be one we are going to be hearing about in the Oscar season going forward, because Saoirse Ronan will probably be nominated for this movie. And yeah, I think The Outrun was a nice, solid indie film. But thank you all for watching this week. Remember to like this video and subscribe to the video store. It helps grow our channel a lot. Next week, I'm reviewing Jason Reitman's new movie, Saturday Night. Really looking forward to that, as well as Terrifier 3, the new movie in the Terrifier franchise. Thank you all for watching. It's been fun. See you next week. And as always, watch more movies.
And the award for most vapid film review of the century goes to...
Okay, movie review. Okay, I thought it was beauty.
And he's now in cinema hell, where one day we'll all be reunited.
This is me at the Regal Cinema crying as I did through much of the film.